Hello and welcome to another AGS Inspired Flip Masterclass. This week's focus is marking and feedback. Now, whatever research you read, you'll always find that feedback to students is normally seen as one of the highest significant interventions that we can use as a teacher. So it's very, very important we get it right and we make sure our feedback is hitting the mark. However, the bar has been raised significantly in the last few years, and no longer is it just acceptable to mark with like a tick and flick approach, which was kind of acceptable a few years ago. It's now all about detailed marking and giving the students the opportunity to act upon their feedback. And this is really important. So within this video, I want to outline some tips really to help you manage your marking, because with the with that raised bar approach, it can seem quite overwhelming with the amount of work that that teachers expect to mark now. And it's how we can actually mark quality and really have that marking make a difference, rather than just marking everything in sight just because we think that that's going to actually do the trick. So hopefully we'll have some tips and tricks as we go along. Okay, the first thing is about managing your marking, and the picture or the icon on the screen there really is one of the most horrible sights that I see as a teacher at school, and that's when every night teachers are carrying huge crates back to their car with books, trying to mark all these books, and I really worry for how sustainable that is for teachers. And that actually, yes, we get holidays, but actually, if we're doing that every single night, where is our energy and our time and our enthusiasm to plan highly engaging lessons? So really, it's about managing your marking, and I think one of the things that I've sort of picked up throughout the years is to actually have, like we say to students when we have a revision kind of rota, is to have a marking rota, and to think about which books you're going to mark on which days, and try to stick to that, because then you can feel like you're organised, you've planned for what night you're going to do which books. And also it might even be helpful to actually share the dates that you give the books back with the students, so that then you have to stick to that. It's far too easy to kind of push it aside to think, well, I'll do it the next day and I'll just leave it to the day after, and suddenly you have a mountain of marking that psychologically is a real barrier to you to you performing in the classroom. So that's the first tip really, is to create a rota, work out when you're going to how often you're going to mark books, which sets you're going to mark on which nights. And then you can feel very organised in knowing what you're doing, which nights, which days, or in which of your free time at school you're going to be marking sets of books. Secondly then is not to mark everything. I think that if we have a kind of a scattergun approach to marking everything that students do, then there isn't any real quality, because it's such a light touch. I think that what we're talking about now is giving students the opportunity to act on their feedback and making it really detailed. We can't physically mark every single piece of work to that standard. It's just an impossibility, and we need to realise as a profession that that's just unrealistic. What we do need to do though is we need to make sure that we mark certain pieces of work at a real high quality, at a real high standard, and then give the students the opportunity to act on that feedback. And also, if you're only marking certain pieces of work, that marking carries a lot more importance when the students get that, rather than every time they get the books back every day there's a little bit of marking. The kids probably just don't really give it any thought. When there's suddenly a piece of work that's been marked, then I think that carries a greater weight. So think about which pieces of work you're going to mark. Maybe look at that from your schemes of work, and then make sure that that piece of work is marked very, 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 very well. Next is really to refuse substandard work, and this is really about standards and about saying to students that when a piece of work comes in, you don't have to mark it and spend an hour writing, why haven't you done this, why haven't you done this, where's this, this isn't up to standard. Literally, don't mark it, send it straight back. Refuse to mark that piece of work, and make sure that in your mark book you have a code for the fact that it has been refused, so you know that. And then make sure that you follow it up, and the student then has to then resubmit that piece of work to the right standard. The last thing we want to do is is teachers to be wasting time, literally writing where is this and where is that. If it's not up to standard, don't mark it. Send it back to those kids and give them the real message that you're only going to be marking quality work. Right, next is how can we develop marking codes, and I think the obvious code that most people use is the SP for spelling, and we start to use that maybe in the margin of the books, and it's about, well, how can we start to develop more marking codes so that it makes your marking a lot quicker, rather than writing out paragraphs or long-winded sentences. It may be that a lot of your students are making the same mistakes, and by developing some codes for your marking with your students, then that might be a lot easier. And I think that's something as a school we need to look at but I think it's something that we can start to develop in our classrooms now, and then when we see the best practice, we can then start to use that best practice around the school in other classrooms. It may be that you're marking a piece of work and a group of students making the same mistake all the time, and you start to write on every book and you're thinking, hang on a second, this is taking me a ridiculous amount of time. Well, it may be you mark it with a little number 1 or a number 2 for the next one, and then when you give the students the books back, you say, right, there's a few codes in there. Number 1 means this, and then you've got it on the board. Number 2 means this, and then they can actually then start to they can start to improve on their work in the dirt time, which we'll look at in a second. Related to the codes that you've got on the board, and I think that will cut down massively the amount of time rather than writing out the same sentence over and over and over again. Next is, how can we give feedback in lesson time? And I think this is the trick really of the teacher who goes around with their pen in their hand or their yellow highlighter to do some yellow boxing, is literally to, as you're walking around and when you're monitoring work, take a pen with you. Start to mark work as you're walking around. Utilize your time and be more effective and more efficient with your time in the classroom. And I think if you start to plan for this, you then give the students more independent learning time, because you're not at the front. You're not doing all the directing of the traffic at the front. Actually, you're setting independent work tasks, and then you're getting out around with your pen, with your highlighter, and you're going around and you're marking work as you go. That will hopefully give the students more kind of direct, dynamic, and quick feedback. But also it might be able to cut down on how many times you have to then do a detailed piece of marking, because if you've done a lot of that kind of little and often frequent marking throughout the books, then at least you have been on the ball, you have been marking things, and then when the opportunity arises for a detailed piece of marking, it's not the only piece of marking in the book, because you've done your little and often kind of dynamic marking as you've been going around the class. Dirt time is very important, and it's something that we've done very effectively at Acklam over the last few months. And this goes back to the initial comment I made about students having to act upon their feedback. And I find it heartbreaking when you mark lots of work and you put all these fantastically detailed comments on, and the students don't even look at them. They kind of look at it and, well, whatever, and they don't do anything with it. And it's just a complete waste of your time. That might be 5 hours you spent marking that set of books. And what impact has that made? Nothing. We need to see impact from the marking. So dirt time is fantastic, because you literally direct the students at the start of the lesson, and you say, right, look, open your books, look at your feedback. I'm now going to give you 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on how detailed your feedback has been and how detailed the piece of work was initially. And you give that time so that the students are literally in silence, reading their comments, understanding them, and then acting upon them and improving their work. Rather than leaving it to the students at home, we know that that's probably not going to work. So let's start actually managing that time and having that potentially at the start of your lesson. And it also gives you some time to kind of do some of the things that you need to do at the start of the lesson. It might be to set your PowerPoint up, to do your register, to get some worksheets out, whatever you're doing, set an experiment up, who knows. But the students can actually be then acting on their feedback in that time. Another one is marking for planning, and when you're marking a set of books, it's useful to have maybe some post-it notes or some paper with you. And when you're looking for those, what you should be looking for is people or students making the same mistakes, because as we probably all know, sometimes when students make a lot of students are making the same mistakes over and over again, it's maybe not the student's fault. It's maybe the way you have delivered the lesson, the way you have tried to explain something. And if everyone's not getting it, then we need to then look at ourselves and think, well, maybe I need to do that a little bit differently, or I need to go revisit that next lesson. And having some post-it notes or some paper with you while you're marking, to jot down all those mistakes and to jot down, to start to piece together, what are the common issues here? Is it a presentation issue? Is it a content issue? Is it a structure issue? What is it? And then you can use that to plan your next lesson with them. Because what you don't want to be doing is trying to address the same problems week after week after week. And if you're not doing anything to then, to then move that forward in the lesson, then you will have those same problems, and it'll feel like Groundhog Day every time you're marking that set of books. And lastly, an interesting one I want to leave you with, and I want to come back to this within the session on Tuesday, is marking without grades. Something I trialled at my old school as part of my NPQH program. And I looked at the effect of removing the grade from the marking and just having the quality feedback there. And I did a little experiment where I had I looked at one group and I observed a group actually receiving some feedback from an English teacher, and we initially watched them receive it without grades. So it was just the detailed comments, you know, the kind of what went well and the EBIs, no grade at all. And the students then, when they received that, they read it. They were very, very quiet, almost in silence, reading very carefully all their comments. And that was exactly what we wanted. 2 weeks later, they then received a very, very similar feedback from a similar piece of work. This time it was exactly the same, what went well, EBIs, but it had a grade on the bottom. And the difference was staggering, and the students literally were in silence for maybe 5 or 10 seconds. They looked for their grade, they didn't read the feedback, and they just wanted to then know, what did you get, what did I got? I got an A, I got a B, I got a C, and they were only bothered about the grade. And I thought that from observing that, it was very interesting in terms of what students value. And it's to throw it out there to say, well, you know, is that something we want to look at? And I'd like to see some people maybe trial that in their classrooms, and to see, you know, does that, you know, what impact does it have to remove the grade? Now, we can't remove the grades all the time, because there's certain pieces of work you will need to grade for assessments, whether it's our internal assessment as a school or whether it's a piece of coursework. But does every piece of work you give back have to have a grade, or is it more about what the students need to do to improve? So that's just to leave you to think about that. And to think about your own personal experience of, you know, I always, when I talk to teachers about this, I always liken it to like a driving test. When you heard the word passed, when you passed your driving test, you weren't bothered about the minors, you weren't bothered about what you did wrong, you were just bothered about the fact you passed, and you just wanted the keys. And I think if you liken that to a student who has a target grade of a C, and you give that student a C grade for their homework, or for a piece of work you give back to them, there are probably 100 things that they could do better in order to get an A. But in the mind of that student, the student thinks, job done. My potential's a C, I've got a C, fantastic. Why would I want to do all of this stuff to make it any better? Because I've done what I needed to do. So have a think about that, and we'll come back to that in the session. I'd like some people to explore that in their classrooms over the next few coming weeks and months. So that's it. Hopefully those tips will help you manage your marking and make it as effective as possible, and to really make sure that you're not going to burn yourself out marking thousands of books every week with very little impact in the classroom. Okay, thank you very much.